Hello Year 8, I am back again. You may notice there's something a little bit different about the screen this time. I am not on it. I'm just trying out some different things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, so bear with me for the time being. Right, first things first. I would like you to have a look at this object and just have a think about what you think this object is and when you think it comes from. Okay, so we're moving on from the Great Fire of London and we're coming on to that topic, the Industrial Revolution, that I know each and every one of you has done a lot of work on. So pause this video, have a little think. Can you come up with an answer to what this is? Okay, so hopefully you've had some time to think and you've got a couple of different ideas. This is actually called a games table. Oh, a little bit of a spelling mistake there. It was made in 1817 and has several games, counters, dice, a dressing mirror and a writing slope. This table is also known as a polyterpic table, as polyterpic means multiple enjoyment. So this is something from the 19th century. Now, it's very different to the PlayStations and Xboxes that we use for entertainment, but this is what many people in the 19th century would have used for entertainment. So, we're going to do a little bit more source investigation in just a moment, but today our title is How Did We Get Here? So what I'd like you to do is write that down in your exercise book, and I'd like you to write the date, please. Make sure they're underlined with a ruler. No freestyling here for me, please, Year 8. And you will see that our learning objective is to investigate the difference between the 18th and 21st century, specifically in England, because obviously every country is different, and to generalise is not something we want to do in history. Okay, moving on. We are going to have a quiz. I would like to see what your knowledge of life in different centuries is like. You're going to see 10 images come up on the screen, and you need to write down which century you think each image comes from. Remember, centuries are always the number ahead of what the year is. So we're in 2020 at the minute, but we're in the 21st century. The Tudors were around in the 1500s, which means they were around in the 16th century. So in your book, write the numbers 1 to 10, and then next to each number you're going to write down what you think it is and what century you think that item comes from. So pause the video here. When you're ready, we will begin. Okie dokie, number 1. What do you think this item is? Pause the video, write down your ideas. I'm just going to scroll through these. I'll tell you when I'm moving on, but write down your ideas. You can always rewind the video if you missed something, and you can pause the video while you're writing. So that's number 1 for us. Number 2 coming up. Okie dokie. And number 3. And number 4. Number 5. Number 6. This is my favourite. Number 7. Number 8. Number 9. And number 10. Lovely Year 8. I hope you've got some interesting ideas written down there. Some are a lot trickier than others. If you didn't get all of those written down, pause the video, look over your answers, rewind if you need to. The next slide is going to have the answers. So just beware, next slide has the answers. What I'd like you to do before you go on to the next slide is go and get a green pen for me. Okay, moving on. So let's have a look at these results then. So number 1 was a coffee pot from the 18th century. Number 2 was some swords from the 13th century. Number 3 is a Volkswagen Beetle from the 20th century. Number 4 is a toy doll from the 17th century. Number 5 is a radio from the 18th century. Number 6 is a carriage, I'm sure that was pretty obvious to you, from the 16th century. Number 7 is some cooking utensils from the 13th century. Number 8 is a high-speed rail from the 21st century. Number 9 is a comb. That was quite an interesting one from the 15th century. And number 10 is a typewriter from the 20th century. So you will notice up here in this corner, there's a green dot that says self-assess. Whenever you see this, you should know that you need a green pen, and this is a chance for you to mark your own work. So each correct answer is worth 1 mark. So you're going to have a mark out of 20 because you get a mark for getting what it is correct, and you get a mark for what century it came from. So give yourself a mark out of 20. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, moving on. So what do you think? Using the information that you've just found out, I'd like you to answer the questions below in your exercise book. You do not have to write the question, but if you don't write the question, I'd like you to answer in full sentences so that when I do mark your books, I know what the question was. This shouldn't take you too long, just work through each one. And once you've done that, we're going to move on. So let's start comparing some centuries. We're going to be focusing on the 19th century for this topic, that being the Industrial Revolution. But first, we're going to explore life before and after this time period. On the next slide, you will see a wall of facts about both the 18th and 20th century. You'll notice that we've missed out the 19th century. This is because we need to find out what life was like before this Industrial Revolution and what life is like after the Industrial Revolution, so that we can bridge the gap by finding out about the 19th century. So in your exercise book, you need to draw 2 columns. I would say this should probably take up a page, but if you draw your lines in pencil, you can always add or take away as you go along. You need 1 column for each time period. And then you're going to categorise the facts from the fact wall on the next slide into your 2 columns. I hope that makes sense. So you should have 2 columns, one for the 18th and one for the 20th century. And the next slide is going to give you the information that you need to put into those columns, okay? So go on to the next slide and pause the video there and get on with categorising those facts. There you go. So there should be 9 for the 18th century and 9 for the 20th century. If you want, you can write them in pencil so that you can make corrections. Or if not, you can just write them in pen. You can colour code if you like, it's up to you. But you need 9 in each column. And when you are done, we're going to have a look at the answers. Okay, so moving on, I'm about to show you the answers. So if you haven't finished, pause the video here. Okay, this is what your book should look like. Obviously, it doesn't need to be coloured in yellow, but I've got 1 column for the 18th century, just here, and I've got 1 column for the 20th century. Again, you can see this green dot is here, so that means this is work that you are going to mark yourself. Have a look through, pause the video here, read through what's in each column, tick if it is correct and correct if it is wrong, please. And I will move on just now. So, what would these worlds look like? We've had a couple of facts about each of them, and I think you've got a rough idea, particularly of the 20th century. But you need to draw what you think life in each of these centuries would look like. Be as creative as you can. It could be a bedroom scene, something going on in a house, a vehicle, maybe an office or a classroom. But you have to make sure that whatever drawing, whatever setting you are doing is the same in your 18th century drawing and the same in your 20th century drawing. So let's say I'm drawing a bedroom. I would have to draw a bedroom in the 18th century and a bedroom in the 20th century. These don't have to be big. If you want to draw a box in your book to draw in, that's absolutely fine. If you want to draw it the size of a postcard maybe, that would be a really good idea. But if you want to make it bigger, you absolutely can. Why do I say please make sure they're of the same setting? Well, that's because once you have drawn your 2 scenes, you need to identify and label 3 things that have stayed the same and 3 things that are different between your drawings. So if I am drawing a bedroom in the 18th century and a bedroom in the 20th century, I might say the 3 similarities are the bed, maybe a door, and maybe an area to keep clothes. That might be my 3 similarities. My 3 differences then could say, well, one has a typewriter in it. The 20th century one has a typewriter or some kind of basic computer, whereas the 18th century bedroom has maybe a pen or a quill and some ink at a desk. That would be something that is different because obviously they didn't have computers or typewriters in the 18th century. So pause this video here and get drawing. I'd like to see these with colour. You can use any kind of media you like. Just see how much detail you can get into. And I appreciate that not everyone is an artist. You have seen me draw on a whiteboard. It is not quality content, so just do your best, okay? So pause the video here, get on with your drawings, and I will see you when you are done. Okie dokie, moving on then. So what are we missing? Clearly something big happened in the 19th century, but what? I know you've already done some research using your Industrial Revolution packs, but you may now have more questions, or at least I hope you do. In your exercise book, I'd like you to identify at least 2 questions you have about how life in the 18th century transformed into the life we have seen in the 20th and 21st century. How did we manage to get from what we saw in the 18th century to the life that we now live? Surely the 19th century must have done something in order to facilitate that. So 2 questions in your book about how the 19th century has bridged the gap between how people lived in the 18th century and how people live today. Okay, and as we go through this topic in the next couple of lessons, I hope that you will be able to answer those questions. So it's important that you get them written down. Okay, and once you have done that, I'm about to move on. So finally, in your exercise book, as a little recap, I'd like you to write down 3 key changes across these time periods. Remember, we are missing out the 19th century for now. So you need to tell me 3 things that have changed from the 18th century up to the 20th century. You need to have 2 things that have stayed the same. And I'd like you to identify one way that you think the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, may have led to these changes. So you might need to look back at your Industrial Revolution booklets to help you out with that. Please email me if you are having any problems, if you are not sure what you should be doing, and I will get back to you. Stay safe, stay inside, and I will see you soon. Goodbye, Year 8.